The Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 era of Rareware has aged like fine wine, releasing home run games like GoldenEye 007, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Killer Instinct, Perfect Dark, Banjo-Kazooie, and of course, Donkey Kong Country. Once the studio was bought out by Microsoft though, the golden age hit a wall. Games became more scarce and notably worse in quality, and many developers were creatively held back by the buyout, which caused many notable devs to leave. A small group of those devs got together and created a new game studio called Playtonic Games, and with some hard work and crowdfunding, they released Yooka-Laylee, a brand new collect-a-thon platformer. Now, platform games are my cup of tea, but I've never been too big a fan of the collect-a-thon subgenre. I don't know, the slower, more exploration-based gameplay never did as much for me, especially when compared to more challenge-based 3D platformers. But due to popular demand, I started a Banjo-Kazooie Let's Play on the channel, and I won't lie, the genre's grown on me. This game is really good, and I can certainly see why it has a cult following, and to that extent why there was such a high demand for another game like it, but in my opinion, the original Yooka-Laylee really misses the mark. I bought this game about a year ago when it was on sale and played it for a good hour, then set it down and never played it again. I couldn't figure out where to go and got bored. The worlds are huge, but they aren't full of things to do, it's just big and spacious for the sake of being big and spacious. Every objective is super spread out and almost seems hidden. Most of my time with this game was spent looking for something to do. I was stuck searching for the fun. I wasn't having any. Nothing about the game was particularly bad, and yes, it was an evolution of the gameplay in Banjo-Kazooie, but there's a reason it didn't evolve. Those technical limitations of the N64 were a blessing in disguise and forced the developers to make smaller worlds that were full of things to do. There was way more time spent on each and every part of the world since there was less of it, but in Yooka-Laylee there's so much nothing that it's honestly boring. The majority of the time you're looking for things to do, not doing those more enjoyable things. The game is a perpetual loop of wandering aimlessly for a while, completing a small objective in minutes, and once again, wandering. It's not very enticing at all. So when I heard there was another game in the series, I couldn't care less. I mean, I couldn't even make it through the first level of the original, so why bother? Then I was scrolling through the eShop the other night and came across Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, and wait, it's a 2D platformer? It actually looks good, holy shit. Okay, is it on sale? Sure, buy now. I gave it a shot and could not be happier with the purchase. This game blew my expectations out of the water and is one of the best 2D platformers I've played in a long time, and here's why. Being a 2D platformer developed by previous employees of Rare that worked on the Donkey Kong Country series leads many to assume that Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is a lot like those SNES titles, and they'd be right. Donkey and Diddy, Yooka and Laylee. Get hit and the small guy goes away, you can get them back with a barrel or bell, and your main attack and move is a roll. I'd say it feels more similar to the newer DKC games developed by Retro Studios though. Not only do the physics feel more similar, but they both have a prolonged roll, a pound move, and additional abilities only usable with your sidekick at your side. The gameplay alone isn't what makes the game feel so much like Donkey Kong Country though. It certainly does, but the level designs are really what do it for me. Design-wise, this is essentially a DKC game. Linear levels, familiar assets, similar enemies, the layout philosophies, I mean, come on. Each level even has 5 things hidden that you need to collect, just like the Kong letters, and this results screen is dead-ass the same. Let's be real, they weren't trying to hide it. This is supposed to be another take at modern Donkey Kong Country, and they absolutely nailed it. Being the OG developers though, you'd expect the game to evolve from the original games in a unique way, but it really just feels like the Retro Studios game, so I guess that goes to show they're doing a great job with the series. But that's beside the point. These levels are a blast. They're certainly not as hard as the DKC levels, for the most part, but they're just as interesting and fun to play through. I wouldn't say this is a groundbreaking evolution of Donkey Kong Country, but it's a fantastic expansion off of what Retro Studios has been doing, and I have to commend Playtonic for their work. I'm not saying the original Yooka-Laylee was a bad game, it really isn't, but it's pretty boring in my opinion, and that's not their fault. That's the problem with the genre, and I think they realized that and took it to heart. Those N64 games work so well because of the console's limitations, and evolving this genre into current technical capabilities creates monstrous worlds that are too big to make a collect-a-thon of. Collectibles should be treated as rewards for completing objectives, and those objectives should be relatively clear to the player when they explore the world. You shouldn't have to search for these challenges. What fun is that? Mindlessly wandering around hoping you'll find something you can do? No, who wants to do that? Especially with how boring these worlds are. Don't get me wrong, the characters and their writing are exceptional, but the worlds themselves are lame. Am I really supposed to want to explore this generic-ass looking grass world? Come on, I'm sick and tired of these overused level themes. Even with more generic themes though, smaller worlds would force everything to be closer together and easier to discover, which would encourage players to explore in itself. I don't know if Playtonic is planning on bringing Yooka-Laylee back to a 3D collect-a-thon platformer, but if they do, I really hope they understand the problem that persisted in the last one and look to the worlds of Banjo-Kazooie for guidance. Regardless of what Playtonic decides to do next, taking a step back and turning to their 2D platforming roots for this game seems like a sensational call and a true rebirth of Rareware. They've nailed this type of gameplay, and it really feels like Playtonic is on the right track to create some stellar games in the near future. I'm not saying Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is perfect though, because it really isn't, but it's a step in the right direction. I've merely been talking about the main gameplay, which is the most important thing to get right in any game, and they did, but the things that surround it are pretty lacking. The most glaring annoyance within the game is the hub world. Rather than the more straightforward traditional approach of the DKC games, they opted to make the hub world more of an experience in its own right. It's not 2D like the rest of the game though, it's this 3D kind of overworld that you have to explore to find new levels. It's not big, it's relatively straightforward, and there's some pretty cool puzzles to solve with different berries and abilities, so on paper it's pretty decent. But I don't know, it halts the experience a lot. I just want to keep playing these levels, and having to explore this overworld is kind of a waste of time. It kind of feels like filler. There's nothing offensive about it, but it's never something I look forward to. It's just something I have to get through to get back to the fun. It's mostly a personal thing, but I prefer a more consistent experience. Let me keep playing the 2D stuff, don't break up each level with this. And that's not to say I don't like hub worlds. I think they can be awesome, but the time spent there shouldn't be almost equivalent to the time spent in levels. It should just serve to connect the worlds and maybe have some secrets here and there, but it shouldn't be 50% of the game. Accepting that approach for what it is though, I think they did an amazing job with the execution. Each level actually has two forms, and certain events in the hub world trigger the level to change forms. For example, when you guide this water to flood the stream, the level becomes underwater, and when you fix this dude's fans and the wind picks up, the level becomes super windy and things move differently. I think this is a really cool and unique idea that they once again executed upon flawlessly. And the hub world has some stuff hidden in it too, most notably tonics, which grant Yooka-Laylee special abilities if equipped in levels. You have to pay to unlock them though, which costs quills, this game's coins. Each ability alters your quill count in levels, and the better the ability, the more it takes away at the end of each stage. Not every ability is good though, there's some downgrades that can actually help with your quill scores, which is pretty funny. Broken Joy-Con? Yeah, no thanks, my right Joy-Con is f***ed up on its own. Some also alter the visuals and color palettes of the levels, which is kinda neat too. This is a pretty interesting concept, playing around with different abilities until you find something you like that could potentially improve your quill count. It adds some depth to the game for sure, but I personally didn't play with any activated. This is one thing that adds to the 2D levels that isn't present in Donkey Kong Country, and I think it's an awesome thing to have. Another thing they added are minimum requirements, or as this game calls them, literal paywalls. Trouser the Snake, not even subtle, sets up these walls every so often in the hub world that can only be passed if you meet the required amount of these Kong letter ripoffs. They're never absurdly high, but I love flying through the 2D levels, and it's kind of obnoxious that they make you slow down to find these collectibles. I'm glad they're there, they give the levels tons of replayability, but it shouldn't be a requirement to continue in the game, though I had to backtrack minimally and it really wasn't that hard to meet the requirement. Actually, I lied, these paywalls aren't mandatory to completing the game. As a matter of fact, the last level, the Impossible Lair, is available to play from the start. The whole premise of the game is looking for these bees that give you an extra hit in this Impossible Lair. One is at the end of each stage, and when you feel you have enough, you can give the last level another shot. This level is incredibly difficult, so the name is fitting, and these extra hits are pretty necessary, so it's good in that regard, but honestly, the levels leading up to it don't really prepare you for this difficulty. That's why I didn't want to say the game was easier than the modern DKC games, because for the most part, yes, it is, but it certainly has the most difficult last level. I love that it's available to play from the start. It's cool to give it a shot here and there and do better and better each time until you're eventually able to complete it. Or not. The story that provides this premise is quite lame though. The Stingdom, needs your help in defeating Capital B, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think story is all that important in games though, so this doesn't really bother me, but this generic story leads to another major point of criticism, the game's lack of character. The overworld is as generic as the original game, and the levels themselves look straight out of DKC, for better and for worse. The worlds are beautiful, full of color, and polished as hell, but they're stylistically the same as Donkey Kong Country, and because of that, it doesn't give the game a ton of personality. And the soundtrack is even more lackluster. It doesn't sound like Donkey Kong, it just sounds like generic video game music for the world it plays in. It's not bad, but it's certainly not anything special. The characters themselves are interesting though, but our heroes are essentially Banjo and Kazooie. The big guy's a good Samaritan, and the little guy's a dick. This is probably the biggest downside to the game. It feels too similar to other things. It's a combination of a ton of things I've already played. It doesn't do much new. Now, it doesn't make anything it borrowed worse, it actually makes them better, but it leaves the game with little to no character. That is not a bad problem to have though, because it wasn't trying to be this brand new thing. It was trying to be a new Rareware game, and it does just that near perfectly. I commend Playtonic for this excellent return to form, but even for those who don't care about the golden age of Rare, the game feels like the sequel to Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze we've been waiting for. It's a stellar 2D platformer that has so much to offer, and you should really pick it up if you're a fan of platformers or just looking for something new to play. As a matter of fact, for all you Switch owners out there, do not waste $60 on Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze with some Funky Kong mode that makes the game easier. No, screw that. Buy this game for $15. You'll get just as much, if not more, out of it. And with that said, I'm putting this game back in my N64. Tune in on Fridays at, actually whenever the hell I finish them up in editing. Tune in Fridays for more episodes of the Banjo-Kazooie Let's Play, and I'll see you later. Hey, thank you so very much for watching the video. If you like what you see, drop a like, and if you want to see more and help the channel grow, you should definitely subscribe. If you want to watch more videos like the one you just finished up, check out my platformers playlist. There's tons of similar videos in there about other platformers that I know you'll enjoy. Thanks a lot, I'll see you later.